Blender modeling tutorial for beginners, I will show you how I made a game-ready, low-poly medieval house in Blender. This was a requested tutorial by R. Ba. I begin by scaling the default cube to the size of the first floor. I then apply the scale using Ctrl-A. In edit mode, I delete the top and bottom faces since they will be hidden and the house will only be viewed from the outside. I select the top edge loop and extrude it up along the Z-axis to form the second floor walls and roof. I scale the two side edges toward the center to form the pitch of the roof. I select the front and back walls of the second floor, and using the P key, I separate them from the rest of the object. I select the first floor walls and tab into edit mode. I select the top of the roof and close the hole using the F key. I select all three sections of the roof and separate it from the rest of the object. In object mode, I add a solidify modifier with an offset of 1, and I change the thickness to the desired size. I then apply the modifier and tab into edit mode. I extrude the bottom edges of the roof using Alt-E so they overlap the house. I select the entire roof using Ctrl and Numpad Plus and scale it along the Y-axis so it overlaps the front and back of the house. In object mode, I then apply the scale using Ctrl-A. I will now add the exposed rafters. I duplicate the bottom faces of the roof and separate them from the rest of the object. I hide the roof and add two vertical loop cuts to the rafters, scaling them along the Y-axis so they are just within the first floor perimeter. I add horizontal loop cuts to the bottom of the rafters to delineate where the rafters will be. I then delete the center faces because they will be hidden by the roof. I select the top face and every other face along the rafters and use Ctrl-I to select the unselected faces and delete them. I select the remaining rafters and add a solidify modifier with an offset of 1 and change the thickness. In object mode, I apply the modifier. In edit mode, I make any necessary adjustments. including deleting the faces that overlap the second floor walls. In object mode, I then apply the scale using Ctrl A. For the corner posts, I select the first floor walls and tab into Edit mode. I add vertical loop cuts to the corners of the walls. I select the new corner faces and separate them from the rest of the object. In object mode, I add a solidify modifier with an offset of 1 and change the thickness. I apply the modifier and tab into Edit mode. I delete the top and bottom faces of the corner post since they will be hidden. I select the top inside edge of the corner post and move them up along the Z-axis until they are just inside the roofline. In object mode, I then apply the scale using Ctrl A. For the chimney, I will be using a cube. I place the cube toward the back of the roof and tab into Edit mode. I delete the bottom face since it will be hidden, and scale the chimney to the proper size. I extrude the top face and then scale it along the X and Y axis using Alt-E. I select the center face and inset it. I then extrude it down along the Z-axis. In object mode, I apply the scale using Ctrl A. For the door, I add a cube and scale it to the proper size for the lintel. In edit mode, I delete the back face since it will be hidden. I duplicate the frame for the side part of the frame and scale the frame to the appropriate size. I delete the top and bottom faces and align it to the lintel. I duplicate it to complete the frame. I duplicate one section of the frame and scale it to the size of a wood slat. I separate the wood slat from the rest of the door and tab back into object mode. I then add an array modifier and fill in the door. Applying the modifier. I right-click and set the origin to the center of mass. This way I can scale the door to fit the frame more easily. I select the door and door frame and join them using Ctrl J. I then apply the scale using Ctrl A. I align the door with the front wall of the house. For the hinges of the door, I add a cube and scale it to the proper size. I tab into edit mode and delete the back face. I add 2 vertical edge loops to the right side of the hinge and extrude the new faces. Shaping them as desired. I then align the hinge to the door duplicate it, and move the duplicate down along the Z-axis. Add a cube for the door handle plate and scale it to the proper size. I then add a torus and change the major segments and minor segments. I rotate the torus around the y-axis 90 degrees. In wireframe view, I delete the right half of the torus. I then scale it to the proper size for the door handle, and align it to the door handle plate. I then add a second torus and rotate it around the x-axis 90 degrees. I scale it and align it to the first torus. I align the entire door handle to the door. In object mode, I then apply the scale and rotation using Ctrl A. I will use a cube to make the window frames. I add a cube and scale it to the size of the top piece of a window frame and tab into edit mode. I delete the back face of the window frame and add a mirror modifier for the x-axis, with the first floor walls as the mirror object. I duplicate the top of the window frame and move it down along the z-axis. I then duplicate both of these frame pieces and rotate them around the x-axis 90 degrees, aligning them to the top and bottom frame pieces. I then add a plane and rotate it around the y-axis 90 degrees. I place it within the window frame and scale it properly for the glass of the window. I add a grid and change the X and Y subdivisions and the size. I rotate it around the y-axis 90 degrees. I select every other row and delete the faces. I rotate the grid around the x-axis 45 degrees. I then duplicate the grid and rotate it around the x-axis 90 degrees. I extrude the lattice along the x-axis to add some thickness. I then add the lattice to the window and delete and move the extraneous faces. I then align the window to the side wall. In object mode, I add an array modifier. And move it up above the mirror modifier. I change the Y offset and count and then apply the modifier. I center the windows on the wall and then apply the mirror modifier. I tab into edit mode and duplicate one window. I then rotate it around the z-axis minus 90 degrees and align it to the front wall. In object mode, I select the windows and apply all the transforms. I now move on to the framework on the second floor of the house. I add a cube and scale it along the Y and Z axis. I tab into Edit mode and add a mirror modifier for the Y axis. Using the first floor walls as the mirror object. I delete the back face of the frame and scale it along the x-axis. I then align it to the top of the first floor. I duplicate the frame and rotate it around the y-axis 90 degrees. I align it to the second floor wall. In object mode, I apply the modifier. I now move on to the framework on the first floor sides of the house. I select the framework from the second floor and tab into Edit mode. I duplicate the horizontal framework and separate it from the rest of the object. I rotate the duplicate frame around the z-axis 90 degrees and move it to the center of the windows on the side of the house. I add a mirror modifier along the x-axis with the first floor walls as the mirror object. I then scale and duplicate the framework to fit between the windows. I then make a duplicate and rotate it around the x-axis 90 degrees. I align it to the side of the house between the horizontal framework and the ground, including underneath the windows. I make multiple duplicates and align them as needed. In object mode, I apply the transforms and apply the modifier. I now move on to the framework on the first floor front and back sides of the house. I select the framework from the first floor and tab into Edit mode. I duplicate two sections of the framework and separate them from the rest of the object. I rotate the duplicates around the z-axis -90 degrees and align them to the front window. The horizontal and vertical framework and rotate them around the z-axis 180 degrees. aligning them to the back wall. In object mode, I apply the transforms. I will make a very simple ground for this tutorial. I add a cube and place it below the house and scale it. I hide everything except for the door and the ground. In edit mode, I use the knife tool, which is the K key, and make a path to the door. I then unhide everything. I will now UV unwrap everything I have made so far. I select the chimney and hide everything else. In the UV editing workspace, I select the entire object and use the U key to bring up the unwrapping menu and choose Smart UV Project. I repeat this process for each successive object. I select each of the objects and add a small bevel. Now it is time for some materials. I downloaded all the materials I will be using from CC0 Textures. Link is in the description. I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on. I select the ground and add a material. I select the principled shader, and using Ctrl-Shift-T, I open the ground material. I select the ground and tab into edit mode, selecting the pathway, I add a new material and assign it to the faces. I open the stones and then change the scale on the mapping node. I repeat this process for each material. Now note, if you notice that something isn't looking right, such as the wood grain, you may need to select the UV island and rotate it. After I'm done rotating the faces, I'll need to move some of the island so everything fits in the UV space. For the glass, I tab into Edit Mode and select the faces. I make a new material and assign it to the faces. I change the transmission to 1 and the roughness to 0.2. If you have a request for a tutorial, a question, or a comment, feel free to leave a comment below the video. If you're interested in learning more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.